and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Jerome Placido. Jerome, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nils. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm looking forward to digging into all things leadership with you, Jerome. But first, would you share with me and our audience the role that you're in today and the company that you work for?
Sure, absolutely. So currently right now, I am a senior director of engineering at a company called Coursedog. It's a software company for higher education. I've actually been in higher ed tech for about 10 years. What's unique about Coursedog is that we deal with an integrated academic operations platform. So we really engage and help universities operationally to operate as efficiently as possible with our various solutions that we have, from scheduling to course catalog to curriculum management.
Cool. And are you guys involved in the actual delivery of the courses or more in the management and infrastructure of how these organizations or the higher institutions run?
Yeah, we're more involved on the back end, sort of back office things. So running the actual university and things like that.
Got it. And, from a total outsider point of view, looks like one of the most challenging logistical things to align all the professors and all the topics and all the courses and all the times and all the curriculums. And I imagine you guys make that a whole lot easier for these higher ed institutions. Is that right?
100%. Actually, our scheduling product does exactly that. It takes into account the various faculty, the rooms, and then the courses you'd like to offer, and then actually provide a reasonable schedule to offer. And on top of that, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities there to optimize for student engagement, what students will take, what's more likely to be taken from a certain student population and things like that. So a lot of opportunity to help universities optimize.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Wonderful. All right. So, Jerome, let's go back in the time machine a little bit and would love to hear about how you got into your very first leadership position.
Yeah. It's funny because I wasn't actually looking to become a manager at the time. At the time, I really was trying to prove my engineering chops. And so talking to my manager at the time, I said, hey, I want you to let me handle this project and I will go ahead and I'll take care of everything. I don't want you to worry about a thing about it. And so from the beginning of the release throughout, the rest of the 6 months, which is how long our releases were at my past company, I handled it all. I helped to run the, sprints. I managed triaging bugs with some of my colleagues and delivered a ton of functionality.
Nice.
And it was only after then that my manager was like, well, you did a really good job at that. Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought about management? And it totally caught me from the side because I was really pursuing a more leadership role in, technical leadership, like, senior engineer, architect, things like that. And so nothing that I considered until that moment. And then after given the opportunity to sort of consider it, realizing that I had some skills and competencies that lent themselves well towards people leadership, I began to sort of entertain it a little bit more seriously.
Good. Okay. So, and I want to ask you about this because you were the exact example that gets thrown around a lot, right? That when the best person on a team gets promoted into a leadership position because they were the best person on the team or because they executed the project really well, just like you, sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. So what was your experience going from that, sole focus on executing incredibly well to then potentially shifting gears and having a completely different focus as a manager?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You make an assumption that I was the best person on the team. I think what I did
on that
well.
Project. How about the best person on that project? Because you were that project. That's fair.
Yeah. I happened to work really well with who I consider the best person on the team who was one of an engineer who had joined maybe a year after I had joined. Okay. And so sort of stacking up, I'd always realized from a technical standpoint that he would always be better than me. And he was just this brilliant engineer who, if you gave him a problem, he would find a solution and have it finished before the meeting was over. Right. Wow. And so I think from that perspective, I agree with you. And actually, one of the shortcomings of a lot of people who move into management is you happen to hire the best engineer on the team and move that person to management. it's a completely different set of competencies and skills and things you have to do. And what I've seen is a lot of good engineers move into management and absolutely hate it because it's a completely
Yeah.
different set of experiences. And so I'm lucky enough to have been a good enough engineer.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and a set of experiences, in my past life before, entering into tech that I think lent themselves well towards people management.
Good. Okay. And thanks for clarifying that
Sure.
and the role and where you were. And it is a common thing. It happens all the time, right? In engineering, in sales, in customer success, in marketing. It's like, oh yeah, the best person, of course, you're going to lead
Right.
the team now. And the reality is, I think the majority of the time, it probably fails. If that was the only reason why someone was promoted was because of they
Yeah.
were the best, right? It really
Yeah.
comes down to the fact that you have to be able to take a completely different approach. You have to be able to put yourself on the side and
Hmm.
want to genuinely help grow and develop other people and make them successful if you have any chance to be successful as a manager yourself. Because it's not about you, right? It's about
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yep.
So I'm curious now, after you entertained this a little bit, you took over a team of 3, I think you told me about. And
Hmm.
how did you navigate the transition from being, executing that project, doing really well in your work, proving yourself as an engineer, to now your focus had to shift? How did you go about
Yeah.
navigating that transition?
I think the route to management of being able to be promoted from within the team that you're currently on to a leadership role lends itself really well to that experience because hopefully you've proven yourself not only to your leadership but to your peers that you
Hmm.
are the de facto sort of leader of that particular group. I happened to be in that situation where either by virtue of my skills or virtue that no one else wanted to do it, it's we'll assume the first part, that
Yeah.
it lent itself really well. So I was still able to partner with my team in that we were able to deliver functionality and we were able to function as a cohesive group, um, and not hit too many speed bumps of, oh, now you're my manager, there's this weird dynamic. So I
Yeah.
think that lends itself really well. It would have been a lot harder for me to have been promoted to management to a net new team as a new manager. So that I'm grateful for that experience, and because
Okay.
of
So
that I was able. Go ahead.
No, it was really interesting because sometimes the biggest challenge is in being a peer one day and being a manager to the same group the next day. So you're
Right.
saying that actually was beneficial as opposed to detrimental, and you would rather have had that situation than been set in a net new environment. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that actually molded sort of how I looked at leadership moving forward, just because I really do look at it as a partnership with those who I work with. And
Hmm.
so that really solidified sort of my, order of operations with how I would interact with anyone who reported to me. Well, it really is a partnership of how we're together going to accomplish things, reserving all obviously the ability to veto anything that you feel like would set us in the wrong direction. But that really is what it looked like, I think, for the first even year of, like, until we added someone else onto the team of my management of this small team.
Okay, got it. So I'm curious for your advice. If someone is listening to this and
Sure.
perhaps either going through that transition right now, in that first year where they were a peer and now they're a manager of 3 or 4, whatever it is, I went through the exact same thing back when I got to that level as well. I was a peer on Friday and I was a manager on Monday, right?
Yeah.
What advice would you share with that individual thinking about how to make the most out of the relationships that now have to evolve because you're
Yeah.
in a different position and responsible for different things?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that a new leader, any leader, can do, but specifically a new leader in this situation, is to dig really deep for feedback. One of the hardest
Hmm.
parts about leadership is you don't know when you're doing it well, because oftentimes there's this stigma about giving a leader feedback and some negative consequence happening.
Yeah.
So leveraging this situation particularly, where you have strong and close connections with your constituents, with those people who report to you, make for a very easy way for you to get a very small feedback loop so you can quickly course correct. Because regardless of whether or not you've been leading the team as sort of a ad hoc leader, changing into
Mm-hmm.
that management role, doing the one-on-ones and performance conversations is a completely different beast.
Yeah.
And so to create that feedback loop gives you a better way to do something that, frankly, most people weren't trained to do. I didn't go to school for management, and most people didn't go to school for management. So that feedback loop and creating that short, reaction time to mistakes
Yeah.
is really important.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful advice. I'll share my side and would love to get your take on it. I was fortunate enough. I actually did go to school and I actually did get an MBA in management and organizational behavior before I got into my first technical people leadership position.
Lucky
Um,
you.
this was it was for the purpose of, I recognized it as a big gap. It had been almost, close to 10 years. I was bouncing around as an individual contributor. I had no idea what I was doing in the professional world. I was not adding a ton of value. And so I went back to grad school and it kind of lit everything on fire for me. And I understood where I was
Nice.
supposed to go after that. So I was very fortunate in that sense. This particular strategy didn't really come from grad school, but I think a lot of the learnings there helped to shape what I did. But when I went from that, peer on Friday to manager on Monday, my first instinct and first reaction, first desire was, this is not Nils's team, right? It's not all of a sudden, oh, now I'm on Nils's team. Like, no, I did not want it to be about me, right? Because if it's just Nils's team or Jerome's team, it's just about the leader and everybody else
Right.
just kind of abdicates everything. Well, I'm on Nils's team, whatever. So one of the things that I did was to work with the team, and we did a brainstorm session and we created an identity for our team. I just happened to be the leader of that team. But we
Hmm.
actually sat down and defined a set of core values that we all agreed to, that we would uphold and we could hold each other accountable to. And we defined what the purpose of the team even was. So it was a shared purpose. Everybody had a hand in crafting it. Very simple sentence, right? And then it was a brand. And the brand itself was kind of funny. We called ourselves Team Solid for the sole reason
Nice.
that when we looked at the values and the purpose on the board, on the whiteboard in that conference room, so it's long, long ago, somebody just said, wow, that's solid. And then that was it. It was like, okay, we're Team Solid. And that was it. And
Team
we all
solid.
knew what we stood for. So now we had Team Solid, and it was a living, breathing thing. I just happened to be the leader of Team Solid, but it was no longer about me. And that was how I approached it. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that kind of approach.
Gosh, I wish I had sort of that foresight that you did. We so one of the things I kept using from that first team, I was like, you guys are just so awesome. We have such an awesome team, and so it just sort of caught on. And so you were Team Solid, we were Team Awesome.
Nice.
Uh,
We could have made a magical combination. We worked in the same company.
we definitely could have. Yeah, and so it happened more, unintentionally the first time around for me. But yeah, I definitely agree that even just creating sort of that team awesome identity, and
Yeah.
so it wasn't just one person, right? And I think the danger of teams, I'd mentioned before, I wasn't the smartest person on my team. There was another engineer who was. The danger of these high functioning sort of and high performance engineers is they become sort of silos of
Mm-hmm.
of knowledge, and just if that person goes, the rest of the product goes, the rest of the team goes.
Yeah.
And creating that identity really puts the onus of everyone to live up to a certain level of
Yes.
expectation and to bring people with them, right? So not only are you excelling, or you're building this thing, but you want your peers to know about it, your quality assurance engineer to know about it. And then there's a shared sense of ownership, which is super important in a team.
Yeah.
Now the leader has a duty to sort of protect it, to make sure people feel that way, but it really does become the team stepping up to the plate and owning it as well.
And that's what I found to be the most powerful piece, was if I could provide the framework and the structure for the foundation of who we were and what we all agreed to, and get everybody to verbally and physically write and commit that I
Yeah.
agreed to be part of Team Solid and I agree to uphold these values and this is why. Then we can all hold each other accountable. And it was amazing the difference that made, because everybody wants to be part of something that is bigger than themselves. And I think it's
Yeah.
up to the leader really to chart the path and to share the steps to go through to do that. I had never experienced that prior in my career, period. And the only times I've experienced post are when I ran the team or I was the consultant brought in and helped organizations build their identity. which is
Yeah.
wonderful because it all does the same thing every time and it's the same end result, right? It's a more collaborative team, it's a more aware team, it's a more connected team, and it's a higher performing team because everybody wants to be part of this thing and we all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. So I love that, you experience the same kinds of things. I'm curious, from in the engineering world, right? Sometimes you know, it, the stigma is that it's a bit more cut and dry, right? Not as much culture is going to come into play, and people being part of Team Awesome, kind of see it as cut and dry, right? It's just outside
Yeah.
viewpoints and whatnot. I was running a customer success team. We were very involved with customers heavily. We had to present all the time, so we were very outgoing and
Sure.
kind of outward focused. So for us, it was totally normal. But what is it like on the engineering side when you get to that Team Awesome side and you start building this brand? Did it grab hold, and did people, or was it a struggle to get people on board?
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because when I think of your typical engineer, it's definitely not someone who's going to get in front and sort of be like the, culture cheerleader.
Yeah.
Uh, so it I guess I have the happy accident of being very, you know, uh, loud. Let's just say that loud
Okay.
and a very outspoken sort of personality, and so that counterbalances sometimes. If you just don't care enough about what people think about you, and you just go kind of for that team awesome, um, they'll just accept that as like a fact of life, and they'll just go, and whether or not they'll play along with it 100%, they'll go along with it. And I
Yeah.
think as long as you can get people to come along with you to a certain extent, I think that's important. I will say though that after this experience as a line level manager, I ended up heading up a larger organization where we were part of an agile transformation, and this was a total of, I think, maybe 6 or 7 scrum teams. And one of the first steps that we did was to create that identity. And
Mm,
so
love it.
all the teams created team names, team agreements, values, and all these different things.
Nice.
And you did have engineers who were like, this is dumb, let me get back to work, right? Like this, there's no actual output coming from this, that this is not valuable to me. But we had created such a great culture within this organization that there were enough people who were like me, who were like, let's do it, team awesome,
Yeah.
that like it sort of just it went forward, and it really did create a sense of unity that you just didn't see prior to sort of naming your team.
And that's a really good point. Like the common refrain of people who may not be 100% engaged or may not want to spend time on doing this, or even the organization as a whole not believing in it, is what's the output, right?
Right.
Where's the hard metric that I'm going to see? Curious for your thoughts on that, and I'll share mine too, because I've gone in and consulted with companies to help them do this. I've done it myself, but there can also always be this like aura of, well, how do you measure what that was really worth? And Nils, if I pay you X dollars to come in and do this, what do I get as a return? So let's talk a little bit about that, because this blends the leadership world, and sometimes things are a little bit difficult to measure with the hard results that everybody does want to be able to quantify and tie ROI back to, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. It's really difficult, and I'd actually love to hear your side of this, because the way that we reasoned it out was just overall, what we're creating is a stronger, more cohesive team. So while we're
Mm-hmm.
not having output now, what we'll see is a more communicative, more collaborative team on the outset of this. We may not see it like within the first 2 weeks, but
Yep.
we'll see longer retention. We'll
Yep.
see collaboration. We'll not see knowledge silos and all these different things. And so the end goal actually is more production for you, with the small cost of, it took us like a week to do
Yeah.
these various exercises. So
Yeah.
a week versus keeping someone, our retention rate up until, I mean, this was even through the pandemic, we had only lost, in my 5 years working there, we'd only lost like maybe 5 or 6 people in an
Wow.
organization of 60. And
That's
so that
great.
strong identity really helps with retention, which obviously helps with a lot of other factors as well.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. Retention is a key piece.
Mhm.
Productivity is a key piece. One of my favorite exercises to do if people were hesitant about this, or when I was a consultant and talking to an organization about this, and I would share what an identity means and how it works, and they'd be like, Why? What they kind
Yeah.
of be a little skeptical is like, this woo woo stuff, Nils. And I'm like, nope, really, it's not. I promise.
Woo-woo.
But what I would do is I said, okay, how about this? How about I'll give you a link and you just send this link out to everybody on the team, and sometimes be 10, 15, 20 people, and just answer a handful of questions. Just have everybody answered individually. Nobody's doing this together. It's all anonymous. Nothing's tracked, and that's it. And one of the questions that was usually the most revealing and most powerful was a fill in the blank. And it said, the purpose of, and whatever the team name. So if I was working with the customer success team, the purpose of customer success at this company is blank. And I would get everybody to fill out the survey and fill in the blank. And then I would have a meeting with the stakeholders and I would pull up the list of results from the survey and share with them exactly what people said the purpose of their team and their organization was. And you know how many different responses I got every time I asked that question?
Probably as many participants as there were.
Bingo. That's exactly it. Every single time. And when you see that in plain black and white view, just very clearly, right? It is, you can't ignore it. Now, all of a sudden you look at that and say, okay, if I have 20 people on this team and there are 20 different ideas of what our purpose is, how on earth are we going to be able to deliver what we need to deliver for our customers or for our other internal teams? There's just no way. So the alignment became clear that the alignment was way out of whack. And then that would be the precursor saying, we need to define this. Like, it's really an important piece and can be a huge additive one there.
And just based on that, right, I think in my opinion, one of the goals of leadership is to really have your team operate by itself. And so if there's no alignment, you can't trust them to do what the right thing for the business is because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So that's right. A huge red flag.
And we can't hold them accountable to it either because we didn't align everybody. It's like a catch-22, right? And that touches on one of my favorite points, which I wanted to ask you about, which is around the mindset of, no team or no organization should be reliant on the individual who is technically the leader of it, right? It should be able to function on its own. And I view this, my common saying on this is, and what I coach people over many, many years is you should always be thinking about how you can work yourself out of your job. And it's not to say that you're not going to be useful to the organization anymore. It's just to say that your team should be able to function and run without you all the time, so that frees up time for you to go solve bigger and more important problems that are going to help the organization, right? So that mindset, curious for your thoughts, because it sounds like we're on the same wavelength here, but would love to hear your perspective.
Absolutely. What you just said reminds me, when I was first moved into that director level role, I had asked a previous colleague of mine who was no longer at the company, but he was a leader himself. I asked him, when do you start looking for your successor? And then he basically told me, he's like, well, if you haven't started already, you're doing it wrong. So like day one, you should start thinking about sort of how to remove yourself from the picture. And I guess I'm a little split on this, just because sometimes when I do this, I feel like, man, my team must think I don't want to do anything because I'm always trying to make it so the team operates without me, right? But end of the day, I've seen what happens when a manager doesn't do that. If a manager goes heads down, I was talking with someone just previously, and they're people leaders, well, they're a line level manager, and they were talking about how they just feel 100% at capacity and don't have time to tell their tech leads or other leaders around them what needs to be done. And I came to the realization a couple of days ago that while it may sound unfair, the leader should be the last person to be at 100% capacity. Because if you're at 100% capacity, you can't look around you to see who else needs what. And so you need a view of the bigger picture. So enabling your team to take on some of those things not only is a benefit to them because it helps them to grow and stretch, it also helps them to be more autonomous, which is what we want in the long run. But it helps to free you up as a leader to say, well, these two pieces are moving a little slowly. Let me take piece number 3 and move it over here. And that's far more important than filling yourself up because you don't want the team to take on the burden of
that's right.
some of these small things.
classic saying of you can't see the forest for the trees rings
Right.
true right there, right? There's no possible way you can see the bigger picture, which is a big part of the responsibility of being in that leadership position,
Hmm.
because you can see across everything. You have
Yeah.
the visibility, but you have to give yourself the space. And you have to give
Right.
yourself the time, and you have to be able to pick up on the patterns to see where things are getting slowed down, where things are working really well in order to optimize and figure out what the right balance is. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is about balance though, right? Because I can hear myself maybe saying this to a manager who might report to me and them feeling bad, right? Like, well,
Mhm.
I feel bad that I should be doing it because my team is working so hard. And what I would say there is like, well, if your team is working so hard, are they working hard on the right things? Because if not, another reason for you to step higher and to take a look at what the moving pieces are.
Yeah. Yeah. Is your team working hard? Like, as long as they're working hard on the right things,
Right.
we're in great shape. But if they're working hard for the sake of working hard, or because there's some other blocker that somebody developed a workaround because they didn't want to really address the real issue, and you see the real issue and you didn't do anything about it, then that's a failure,
100%.
right?
Yeah,
We want to go
absolutely.
down that path. So, with this particular individual that you were talking to, what advice did you share about that being at 100%, and what was the guidance you gave them?
Yeah. It's the same that I've given to a few other people in the past. Is one of the first things that I like to do, and maybe you've experienced this as well. But like as a manager, your calendar is just full there,
Yeah.
and there's hardly any like cracks in between. And so one of the pieces of advice I gave to start was to categorize your calendar, color code it,
Mm-hmm.
by actual people leadership things, any sort of team things,
Yeah.
inter-team things, and just to whatever categories you think actually fall into your line of work, and then to take an audit if there's one color that really massively outweighs the other, right? And so we're still in the process of doing that, but like I think that is step one, is to see what's really taking up your time,
Yeah.
and then to question whether it should be taking that much, or if there's any of those duties that can really go off into someone else's hands.
That's great. I love that. And color coding the calendar is wonderful because there nothing beats a visual on a
Yeah.
calendar where, 3 to 5 categories at most, so 3 to 5 colors, and
Yeah.
you see just how much is actually related to each color, and it's eye-opening. And you say,
Yeah.
wow, no wonder I
Yeah.
don't have any time because I'm spending 90% of my time in this one bucket, and all the stuff that's I would love to do, focus on strategy, direction, big problem solving, I'm
Yep.
spending virtually zero there. Hold on.
That that happened to me when I first took on that organization of 60. Is I made the attempt. I was like, okay, I'm going to do skip levels with everyone, and
Yeah.
I'm going to do it every quarter.
Okay. Yep. That's a big take.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I didn't quite do the math ahead of time, and I started doing these skip levels. And I one day I was like, wow, I have no time for anything. And I looked at my calendar, and it was all red. Red was my color for people for skip level
Yeah.
meetings. And I realized that that particular approach was not sustainable at all. So I had to find something else. But if it wasn't for like that, I wouldn't have easily been able to identify it from the calendar view.
So the skip level one is interesting. This comes up a lot in all the coaching conversations I have. So how did you handle that skip level where you want to keep a finger on the pulse,
Yeah.
but you can't necessarily, allocate time for one-on-one for everybody, even if it is only once a quarter? How'd you handle that?
Yeah. I can tell you the things I tried. I can't tell you that any of them were entirely successful. So one was I moved it from every quarter to every 6 months that I would rotate through,
Okay.
which
Yep.
still ended up being a lot, but it left a longer feedback loop. If you waited 6 months to hear from the same person, you're sort of out of touch.
Yeah.
Another thing that I tried was office hours.
Mm-hmm.
I would post myself in a room, and just have a sign up sheet, or anyone could just drop in if it was empty. And I sat before the pandemic. I sat in a room that was very visible. Everyone was always walking through it.
Yeah.
So as people were walking by, I could either just be like, "Hey, come on in and chat," or they would just drop in themselves.
How much engagement did you get on the office hours? Curious.
Uh, it was good for maybe the first 3 months, and then afterwards, it sort of tapered off a
Tapered
little
off.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. I
yeah,
would imagine so. All right.
yeah.
What else did you try?
And then finally, I just started. I started querying my manager. So I'm like, "Hey, give me one or two people within your
Mm,
organization who you'd want me to talk with, or if you're hearing something from a one-on-one like explicitly have them set up time with me and don't wait, just have them do it. That worked a little bit better that because it was more targeted. I got to
Yeah.
hear very quickly those things. It didn't work in the sense that there were some people who were just not prone to sort of doing that and speaking up, that there were some people in the org that I didn't get to connect with as quickly.
Okay. So let me, that question has come up a number of times in my conversations with clients, and curious for your thoughts on this, because it's been my kind of go-to
Sure.
direction on that, is to facilitate some small groups at the skip level. And
Yeah.
the group piece, right, it comes with a different dynamic. It's not all one-on-one, so it's not personal. It does allow you to get closer to a larger number of people with less overall time and effort and energy. And if the groups are, even if they're from the same team, or perhaps, a group of people from different teams, then it could be a little bit of a networking opportunity for them, depending on the size of the org. Have you ever tried any group-based stuff at the skip level?
Maybe informally. It's funny that you mentioned that, because that was before I'd left work days where I was at. Before I'd left there, that was on deck to try. I manage a much smaller organization now, so there's no need for skip levels.
Yeah.
But it was on deck to try. I say informally because there was a group of people that maybe we would all go to get coffee at the same time, and they were
Yeah.
all sort of skip levels in a sense. So I would go and grab coffee with them, and we would sort of catch up on the latest news. And so that happened on a more informal basis, but nothing formally really. But I do see how that would be very effective. And I definitely probably will make that the first thing I try next time I'm in that situation.
Yeah, cool. Well, when the Coursedog keeps blowing up and he doubled the size of your org, then you got the plan already set in place.
There you go.
Awesome. All right, Jerome, last question here. If you could go back in time, knowing everything you know today, but go back to that point when you got into that first leadership opportunity with that team of 3 people where you were a peer and then a leader, and you know everything you've experienced to this point, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, I would say shut up.
Love it.
And the reason is I think at the time, I felt like I had to fill the room with an opinion or a voice, and not to prove myself, but I felt like I was responsible for making sure the conversation moved forward, and that because of that, I was responsible for making my opinion known.
Yeah.
We were talking about feedback loops earlier, and creating that gap of communication from the manager himself sort of lets you know how much leadership also exists, is that feedback loop within like a meeting, or even just like a thread.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, I would tell myself, if it was I was talking to me, I'd have to tell myself to shut up. But if I was talking to someone else, I'd say, speak less and listen more. It sounds super cliche, and I know a lot of people say it, but it's so true. And it's hard to do all the things that we talked about, create a self-running team, identify leaders, and all those other things without
you can't
being quiet.
Yeah, agree. I'm with you 100%. And it's cliche for a reason, because and the people who, understand and take the cliches and actually do the work, they get the results. It's the ones who say, oh, yeah, everybody says to listen more and talk less. I already know that. And those are the ones that aren't going to make it very far, right? They're not going to build an incredible team. They're not going to inspire others. They're not going to have a line of people waiting at the door to work for them again. So, Jerome, it's been absolutely a pleasure talking leadership with you. Thanks so much for your insights on all these wonderful areas covered and incredible advice that you shared.
Thank you.
Can't wait to hear what you and the team at Coursedog are going to continue to do. So thanks so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.